All right. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We're very excited to have you here at Learning in the Teenage Years, Empowering Your Student for Success with Research-Informed Strategies. I'm Kristin Simmers, Director of Cognition and Learning at the Forman School.
My
Hi,
name is,
go ahead, Jenai.
sorry. My name is Jenai Fitzpatrick, Chief Cognition and Learning Officer at Forman.
And I am Allie Maxwell, the Assistant Head of School at Forman.
We are so excited to have such a good audience here tonight, and we want to encourage everyone to please, as you think of questions, pop them in the chat, and we are going to take your questions throughout the session, and then at the very end, we have a Q&A time when we'll be able to address some of those. Allie, do you want to say anything about the recording?
Sure, please just note that this will be recorded and we will be emailing it out to all attendees tomorrow with a brief update on things and ways you can engage even more.
All right, so let's jump in. We'll start with just an overview of what this session is going to be like. It'll be about 45 minutes, but that's allowing for lots of time for Q&A at the end. We're going to start talking about what neurodiversity is and what that can look like in school and at home. And then we're going to talk more about the teenage years. What is it about this time period in life that can present some pretty unique challenges? And also, what are the opportunities that go along with this critical time in our young learners' lives? Throughout the presentation, we're going to provide some very simple research and informed strategies that we've chosen to be as broadly applicable as possible. So really short, sweet, simple strategies that you can apply in a range of contexts. And our hope is that at the end of the session, you'll choose one or two of these to try out on your own and see what you think. We will spend a little bit of time saying why Forman, why some families might choose our school for some of these purposes. And then we'll end with a Q&A. And again, we really encourage you to drop your questions in the chat, and we're happy to address them at the end of the talk. Some of the key principles we're going to be talking about tonight are neuroplasticity and the teenage brain. It's one of my favorite topics. We're also going to talk about what a strength-based approach looks like. We're going to dive into executive functions and metacognition. Executive functions and metacognition are two things we really focus on in our cognition and learning department and throughout Forman. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about what those are and what that might look like in school and at home. So to start, what is neurodiversity? There's lots of different possible definitions how you might define neurodiversity. So to keep it as broad as possible, we're going to think about neurodiversity as simply part of the natural variation in how people's brains process information. Now, there's a wide range of what that might look like. You might think of specific labels or diagnoses or different traits. And we acknowledge that neurodiversity is a pretty broad term and a pretty wide umbrella that can encompass a lot of different things. But the most important part of our view of neurodiversity is to emphasize that we view it as a difference, not a deficit. So what that means is we recognize neurodiversity as one aspect of our very complex learner profiles. So it will include lots of different strengths, and we take into account the full learner's characteristics and personality and areas of strength and challenge. And we really design our instruction to both support the areas of challenge while also recognizing the areas of strength. So the big takeaway is just to remember that with our neurodiverse learners, their challenges do not define them as a learner or as a person. Their challenges are one aspect of a very complex learner profile, and part of our job is to understand that profile as completely as we can so that we can support the challenges while also recognizing the strengths. So what can neurodiversity look like? So it can include differences in lots of different things. You might see differences in attention. You might see differences in executive functions, and there's an asterisk there because we're going to dive into that a little bit deeper. There could be differences in literacy or in math. And obviously, there can be any combination of these broad categories. And again, these are very broad categories. There's a lot of variation within any one of these. And we just wanted to give an idea of some of the common areas where you might see neurodiversity show up It's not an exhaustive list by any means. And when you're dealing with neurodiverse learners, they will come with different strengths and challenges that will show up differently in different contexts. So school is one place that people might think of where you might see some strengths and challenges with neurodiversity. And depending on the context and depending on whether the environment was built with neurodiversity in mind, you might see neurodiverse learners facing more challenges in school environments that weren't built with neurodiversity in mind. The good news is that these students often benefit from specific targeted supports that can both build their areas of challenge while also recognizing and capitalizing on their areas of strength. So it's really important to consider how a student's school environment supports or aligns with their unique learner profile. But of course, neurodiversity doesn't exist in the classroom alone. Many of the challenges that students might face within the school environment will also transfer into different challenges in the home environment. So you might think of things like challenges with time management or organization, or different aspects that can be related to neurodiversity that can impact a student's daily life outside of the classroom, at home, in extracurriculars. And again, these are all things that can be very well supported with specific targeted instruction and coaching. And when we're thinking about high school students in particular, adolescents, these are the kinds of skills that we can help them to develop that will transfer into preparing them for their college life, their adult life, to become independent humans in the world. So when we're thinking about neurodiversity, remembering that it doesn't just exist in the classroom, we often see aspects of it at home and in other environments as well. And with that in mind, we have to also acknowledge that being in environments that are not supportive for your challenges, or environments that don't recognize your strengths, can come with an emotional impact for many, many students. And so it's something that we recognize, and it's something that is important if you're working with neurodiverse learners. It's important to take into account that they might be coming to you with not positive previous experiences in schools. And so what that means to us is we really have to prioritize earning that student's trust, making sure that they know that we see them as capable, and making sure that we're building trusting relationships and creating a psychologically safe environment for them to thrive. Okay, now my favorite part, neuroplasticity and the teenage brain. We're going to start just talking about what is neuroplasticity. And again, at its most basic level, neuroplasticity is the brain's constant state of changing itself. Your brain is forever changing in response to stimuli. It's not inherently a good or bad thing. It's just the natural state of the brain. So at the end of this webinar, your brain will be slightly different than at the start of the webinar. We hope in all wonderful ways. We hope you come away with some little tidbits and sparks and ideas, but your brain is physically changing all of the time. And so some of the ways that that is happening is by creating new connections. So when you think of the brain, you've got about 86 billion neurons in there and some glial cells. And like there's lots of other stuff in your brain besides neurons. Neurons get a lot of the credit. But if you think about the neurons in your brain, when you're learning new things or thinking new thoughts or making new connections, they make physical connections in your brain. It's called synaptogenesis. The synapses connecting the neurons create new connections. So that's new learning. Usually when we're learning something new, we're creating a new connection in our brain. That's neuroplasticity. And then there's strengthening connections and strengthening the pathways. So that's myelination. Once you have a connection in the brain, the more you practice it, the more you strengthen it, that connection physically becomes stronger through a process called myelination. That's also neuroplasticity. And an aspect that people don't always think of is synaptic pruning, which is actually pruning, getting rid of some of the existing connections. And that might sound like a bad thing. And sometimes it could be inconvenient. That is what happens when you forget something, like forgetting is synaptic pruning. The brain is very, very metabolically expensive tissue, meaning it takes a lot of resources to maintain connections. and your brain's really smart. So it's not going to invest resources into maintaining connections that it doesn't think are important. So your brain does you a favor. If you're not using a connection, it says, we don't need to maintain that, and it prunes it. This can also be a really good thing with making the brain more efficient. So not maintaining connections that you're not using. And this entire process here of creating new connections, strengthening existing connections, and pruning, an easy example of where you experience this, in your own life is you can think of any time that you have tried to unlearn an old habit and learn a new one. My guess is that was probably not a quick and easy process, right? When you're trying to learn a new habit, particularly if the old habit is very ingrained, that's a process that can take a lot of time. And that's partially because your brain is creating new connections for the new habit, strengthening those pathways as you build the habit, and over time, the old habit has to get pruned away. So that's an example of what's going on in your brain. And it's very, very related to learning, because when we're learning new information, this is exactly the process our brains are doing. Creating new connections, strengthening existing pathways, and pruning unused connections. So what makes the teenage brain so fascinating is it's one of the most malleable plastic time periods in our lifespan. So in general, the younger you are, the more malleable your brain is, the more neuroplastic your brain is. So you're at your most malleable in early childhood. So from ages like 0 to 3, your brain is just super, super receptive to stimuli. And what that means is it's able to make change pretty quickly with low effort. And what typically happens is as we get older, especially in our adult years, 30, 40, 50 and up, the more we go down, the more we increase in age, our brain can always make those changes. It's always neuroplastic, but in general, the connections, making new connections tends to take a little bit longer and require a little bit more effort. So in general, the younger you are, the more malleable your brain is, the more neuroplastic. What's fascinating about the teenage years is you also have this surge in additional hormones and a huge amount of brain development that's going on, which allows for huge opportunities for neuroplasticity, huge opportunities to create efficient pathways and really shape like the future of these kids' lives. So it's a very crucial time in the brain's development. And you may have heard of the prefrontal cortex. This gets talked a lot about with the teenage brain. And if you want to do a deep dive into this, this is a good resource, Neuroscientifically Challenged. It's a blog by Dr. Mark Dingman. It goes pretty specifically into neuroanatomy, neurobiology, but not as many applications to education directly. But two things you may have heard about the prefrontal cortex in the teenage brain. You may have heard that this is where executive functions are housed. And that's true. Executive functions, which we're going to talk a little bit more about, primarily are housed in the prefrontal cortex. And when we say that, we don't mean that they're happening exclusively in that area. Very few things in the brain happen in one exclusive area. Most things that the brain does use most parts of the brain. So when we say that the EF skills are housed in the prefrontal cortex, you can think of it as kind of a hub. So that's the hub for them, but also know the brain is amazingly interconnected. So it's also utilizing lots and lots of parts. So that's one thing about the prefrontal cortex. It is where EF skills are housed. The second thing you may have heard is that this part of the brain does not fully develop until about age 25. And that's true. I'm going to offer two different ways to think about that. The one, the more deficit model, this is what Dr. David Yeager describes as the neurobiological deficit model, is that because teenage brains aren't fully developed yet, they are not as capable of certain skills, not as capable of inhibition, not as capable of evaluating risk and things like that. What I'm going to propose tonight is that we reframe that and think instead, because the prefrontal cortex is undergoing such significant development during this time period, it is an incredible time period to harness that plasticity and make sure that we are providing the best possible inputs so that our learners have the best opportunity to build those EF skills optimally during this window where that part of the brain is still so receptive and malleable. So that all sounds great. How do we do it? One resource that is really interesting in this area is Dr. David Yeager's work and his book 10 to 25. It's actually summer reading for our staff. And he's a researcher from University of Texas in Austin. And he looks at the science of motivating young people. And it's interesting to consider from his perspective, he identifies this age range, 10 to 25, adolescents, as a very unique time period in the lifespan, not just for this current generation, but he argues historically. Like historically, this has been a unique time period in people's lives, and really looks into how do we harness this time period and really motivate people in this age range. And he goes into the neurobiology of what is going on in the brain at this time and why these learners might be more sensitive to specific cues. And what he found in his research is essentially two common elements that show up repeatedly in motivating learners of this age. And they are status, a sense of social status in your community, and respect. And essentially what he has found is that adolescent brains are very, very attuned to a sense of social status and a sense of respect. They are very ready to recognize if they feel they have been disrespected or if they feel that they don't have status in a situation, and that can be very unmotivating. So, and you may be able to think of examples of this. Maybe you didn't use this language with it, but can you think of adolescents that you know who, react strongly if they feel that they haven't been respected, or react strongly if they feel that they don't have status? So what David Yeager points out is if we can find ways to ensure that adolescents have a sense of status in the community and have opportunities to earn that status and earn that respect, that can be a key to harnessing their full potential and their motivation. So we're going to get to our first research-informed strategy, and it's called WISE feedback. Now, the example from the research specifically applies to the academic context, but we're going to talk about how this same theory can be applied in a range of different contexts. So what the WISE feedback study did, and this is a pretty famous one, he did it with Dr. Carol Dweck, was looked at written feedback given to high school students after writing an essay. And these students had the opportunity to revise the essay and turn it back in, or just keep the grade that they got. And in one setting, the students got feedback written on their paper, and it just said, I'm giving you this feedback to let you know how you did. And the other condition, the feedback said, I'm giving you this feedback because I have very high standards and I know you can reach them. And you can probably guess what the result was. The group that got the WISE feedback, the message that I have high expectations and I know you can achieve them, were about twice as likely to then revise their work and turn it back in. And not only was there a short-term impact, but there was actually a long-term impact. From that one bit of feedback, those students were then in the long term more motivated, more likely to show tenacity and more effort in their learning moving forward. So the takeaway there, it's a very small tweak, but the takeaway there is to think about opportunities that we have in situations when we are providing feedback to adolescents and making sure that we are being clear that we believe they are capable, we believe they are competent, we see what they can do, and we believe that they can grow. And I'm sure those are all things that you believe, but knowing how attuned and sensitive the teenage brain is to signs of disrespect or potential threats to status, it's even more important to make sure that we're being explicit in communicating to adolescents that the reason we're giving you this feedback is because we know that you can do it and we have high expectations, but we're going to help you achieve them.
All right. Thank you, Chris, for setting the stage so beautifully. And I love the shift from the deficit model to like, this time is, the potential is endless. That feels really great. So I'm going to go into some more principles that really help us start to figure out how to tap into and embrace this potential that we know is happening in the teenage brain. So now that we've talked about how powerful it is when teens feel respected and believed in, let's take that one step further by looking at how we see them every day. This second key principle is something that is deceptively simple, I know, but absolutely transformational: a strength-based lens. Adolescents are building identity. The way we reflect back who they are has real neurological impact. When we highlight what's working and not just what's missing, we're not just being kind, we're not just being mom, we're literally strengthening motivation, attention, and self-belief at the brain level. Once again, Jaeger's research shows that adolescents are most motivated when they feel seen, believed in, and valued, just like we all do, especially for their potential and not just their performance. And so much of their lives, especially with school, naturally are about performance. So how can we help them look past that? So again, knowing that their brain is wired for identity development, and whether they say it out loud or not, your teen is asking themselves, who am I? Do I matter? And am I capable? These are really big, scary questions that are going on. And I think we forget as we ourselves have shifted out of these phases, right? But these are really big questions that they are trying to grapple with. And so if we think about the strategy, when we reflect, well, spot and name a strength. And the idea is that when we reflect strengths, we in fact get to help shape those answers for them. So what does spot and name a strength really look like in a real moment? So let's say your teen comes home frustrated after a tough group project that you know they didn't complete until the last minute last night. Maybe they even felt like they had to do a majority of the work. A deficit lens may say, well, that's what happens when you procrastinate and don't speak up. A strength-based lens could sound something like, you know what? You showed a lot of patience and follow through. You cared about doing the job well, even when that wasn't easy. That moment of recognition doesn't ignore the hard parts, but it shines a light on the strength that they might not see in themselves. So now this strategy isn't just based in positive psychology, but it's also something we learned from our collaboration with the world-renowned executive function coach, Jody Sleeper Triplett. She is amazing if you don't know her work yet. She uses this as a consistent practice in her coaching model as well. So again, let's try it. I saw how you stuck with that. That's persistence. Or when they are telling you a story, simply listen with the intention of calling out a strength. And I tell you, I promise it's actually really fun to do for anyone in your life. It's not just fluff, it's fuel, and it helps your student connect with their capacity, especially when school feels hard, and that's pretty often. Naming strengths engages the brain's reward system, including dopamine pathways, which can increase motivation and attention, especially when students feel seen and capable. Next slide, please. All right, executive functions. So this is my favorite topic. I will try not to go on and on, but executive functions are cognitive processes that enable students to achieve a goal. It's the how we get things done. You may even think of them as life skills, right? Because we're talking about planning and prioritizing, task initiation, time management, goal-directed persistence, emotional regulation, and metacognition. Now, we're going to come back to metacognition, although it does fall under the umbrella of EF skills. As Chris reminded us and or informed us, they do live, I love the hub in the prefrontal cortex, but the best news is that it is highly plastic. So it's wired for change and growth, especially with support and practice. This is going to be a common theme that you hear throughout this webinar. So think about your teenage self for a second. Can you imagine what it would be like to live in a world where you're not just expected to know how to write a paper start to finish? That the idea that we can explicitly teach these skills, and really these are skills that it takes to accomplish any task or goal. Like the idea that we can teach and practice and then know that we're not going to be great at all of them right away and that there are strategies to help us. It's just incredible. And I'm so thrilled that we have finally gotten to a place because it changes the whole experience as a student. So, I offer to you to remember that when your child forgets their homework again or avoids that paper, it's not defiance, it's development. They just might need a little support. So our strategy is ask a coaching question. So I'm going to give you a scenario. Now, before I even do that, I want to reiterate that these scenarios are not to create shame or guilt. Look, we are doing our best. We know that you are showing up today because you want to show up as your best selves to support these young people in our lives. So again, these scenarios have happened in all homes across everywhere. Please do not sit in those. Sit and think about the verses and the potential for the shift using the strategy, okay? So it's Sunday night and your teen has started their big history project. You get frustrated, understandably so. Why haven't you started? You're going to fail. Just go to your room and get it done. Okay, so this takes on the role of director and often leads to conflict and an overwhelmed teen who still doesn't know where to start. Okay, so that's happened. What could we do? What could we tweak the next time? So same thing. You see your teen procrastinating, not doing this history project. And you recognize that it's an executive function challenge. You calmly say, bonus points if you say it calm in a neutral tone, that history project looks like a lot to do. What's your first step? Where could you start? Your teen now has a starting point and feels supported, most importantly, not judged. So you try it. What's your plan or where could you start? This again moves you from director to coach and gives your child the chance to build the planning systems, those skills that they're still developing. One tip, if there's resistance, which you know what, there probably will be. Number one, pause. Number two, take a step back and consider that the why behind the resistance or the struggle is often the key to moving forward. And sometimes our teens just don't know what they don't know yet. And that's where the coaching becomes so powerful. So asking that question, maybe they just don't know where to start. And so in that open dialogue now, you have ideally flowing conversation and you can start to figure out what it is that they don't know. And then together you can explore different ways that maybe they move, whether it's time management or breaking down the task, whatever it may be, you can be there to help support, but allowing them to then choose their next step. You're not fixing, you are supporting and empowering. Executive functions, again, just to reiterate, rely on prefrontal cortex activity, and this can be strengthened through modeling, scaffolding, and feedback. Okay, next slide. Metacognition. So metacognition is something that we have all been doing our entire lives, whether we knew it or not. I think we had to figure a lot of stuff out on our own. The question of how can I become more effective and efficient is constantly in my brain. So ideally, this is something that becomes automatic for us, but it's not necessarily for our teens yet. So the ability to think about your thinking, to reflect, to adjust, to learn how you learn. Of course, this is essential for all of us, but even more so for students with learning differences, because it helps them recognize what works for them, so building up that self-awareness, navigate challenges, and advocate for themselves, understanding how to ask, well, understanding what help they might need and then how to ask for it. It's also the foundation of college readiness. This is how students learn to manage a workload, adjust to feedback, and problem solve independently. So what is this strategy? Reframe stuck moments. Again, this may seem very intuitive, but I can assure you it is very powerful. So we're going to give a before scenario. Your teen is struggling with their homework and says, "This is too hard. I can't do it." They shut down. You respond, "Yes, you can. Just try harder." Sadly, this invalidates their struggle and offers no path forward, just keeping them stuck in a state of frustration. And trust me, I know that life moves so quickly that sometimes we're not able to engage in the ways that we hope or in this really meaningful level. I just want to acknowledge that while also continuing to be intentional in finding moments that we can. Okay, so let's say this is a moment that you can. Again, you notice that your teen is feeling stuck. You reframe the moment by saying, "I hear you saying this feels really hard right now. What's the tricky part?" This simple question shifts their brain from reactive to reflective. It encourages them to think about their thinking, pinpoint the source of the problem, and begin to problem solve. This builds the metacognitive muscle they need for independence. So you can try it. What feels hard right now? Or what worked the last time you felt like this? You do your best to show up with compassionate curiosity, right? You're there to explore with them. This shifts the brain, their brain, from fight or flight into reflection, where real growth happens. Just because you're stuck, it's also sending this message like, just because you're stuck, it doesn't mean that you can't do it. And it doesn't mean that you aren't smart enough. It just means you might need some reflection and problem solving. And guess what? I'm in your corner. I'm here to support you in whatever way you need. I'm not going to assume I know what that is. We're going to figure that out together. Reframing a stuck moment moves the brain from reactive to reflective, unlocking problem solving and self-reflection. Opportunities for reflection lead for opportunities for growth. And now, as we understand, growth sticks when it's paired with high support, high challenge, and unconditional belief. Okay, what can you do tonight? So far, we've talked about brain development, motivation, and identity. Now here's a toolkit of 8 strategies, all research informed and designed to build independence at home. As we go through these, I encourage you to not just take them at face value. I would love for you to really consider what it may look like in your family dynamic. Only you know how it would authentically or could authentically work for you. But listen to each one and try to push past just the initial level of understanding. I promise you, these can shift the entire energy in a room. Instead of sitting in fear and tension, which so often in these stressful moments, it's our teens are feeling it, we're feeling it. You ask a question, you shift this energy, all of a sudden there's hope and possibility in the air. You can literally feel the cloud lift. All right, so some we've already named. As you can see, the first 4 we have already kind of gone over, but I'm just going to review quickly. We love reviewing here. So the first one, wise feedback. What does that look like? It's truly the message, this is hard, and I believe you can do it. It pairs high standards with belief, which strengthens effort and resilience, activates adaptive learning networks, and reduces fear-based shutdown. Number 2, spot and name a strength. You were really focused. I noticed that. You started cleaning your room without me even asking. It might not be perfect, but you know what? We're going to notice that you started all on your own. Beautiful. Helps build identity and motivation, and it stimulates the dopamine reward system. Ask a coaching question. What's your first step? This promotes ownership and planning, engages the prefrontal cortex to build executive functions and to practice those muscles that they are going to eventually need to be doing on their own. Talk about strengthening those pathways that Chris was mentioning. Reframe stuck moments. So what's tricky right now? This fosters reflection and emotional regulation, shifts the brain from reactive to reflective. Okay, this one we have not mentioned yet. Try a startup ritual for a chore or responsibility. So let me just say that of all the executive function skills in any learning environments and working with any age, task initiation always ends up being a challenge. This is just simply getting started with a task. So what could you do, especially when it's something like a chore or responsibility that you're not psyched about doing? So what could that look like? You set a timer, you clear the space, and you name the goal. Maybe you play a focus song. Maybe you use a sticky note for the task. These rituals create momentum and tell the brain it's time to start. So to me, this is actually an excellent one to model for your children because you know you don't want to be folding that laundry or doing those dishes. So how could you start your own startup ritual modeling? And then also like own the moments that you still don't want to start. Like, man, this ritual is not working today. I need to try something else. And I think being really transparent about that and owning your own kind of process can be really kind of funny, but also informs that like, look, this is not perfection. Not everything works every single time, but let's problem solve. Let's get creative instead of just feeling stuck where the shame and fear kind of kick in. So this establishes habit loops, reducing cognitive resistance, and hopefully becomes automatic. Okay, celebrate a small win. You sat down without being asked. That's a win. Again, you cleaned your room without me even asking. That's a win. This boosts motivation and confidence, activates the brain's reward pathways, helping reinforce effort and persistence over time. Share the why. This helps you practice independence for next year. So truly this shifts us from do this because I told you so, or you have to do this. This goes into, this is the reason why I really need you to do this. This is why you need to really like step up and make this happen. If you can connect them to that bigger picture, and even better if you can connect it to their own personal why, not just yours, the more powerful it's going to be. So teens engage when they understand purpose, activates connection to personal values, linking action to meaning. All right, last one, reframing failure. This doesn't define you, it teaches you. So teens deserve to know, just like we do, that mistakes are not final, that they're part of how we grow. And this builds resilience by supporting emotional regulation and flexible thinking, key to shifting from shame to growth. We presume positive intent and form an alliance with your student. You can say, let's figure this out together. What support or resource would help you here? You can think of this as a treaty, mutually agreed upon, renegotiable, and rooted in trust. I do want to acknowledge that all of these strategies do take time, effort, and energy. And so there's never going to be perfection. They are things that can be practiced. And again, the more authentic they can come from you, the better. But give yourself time and space and your child time and space to acknowledge that like you're trying something new here, right? They may be awkward about it. They may be like, why are you asking me that question? Give your why. Tell them about this. Tell them how you see this helping shift things moving forward. So these aren't magic, but they really can be powerful. They're just small, repeatable moments of structure, reflection, and belief. So if we could take about 10 seconds right now, what's one strategy you may want to try first? I know all of my brilliant, high-achieving friends out there maybe want to try all of them, but please don't do that. Don't put that pressure on yourself. Prioritize one. And when you're ready, write it down. Try it for 2 days and just observe what shifts. So just to wrap up, as we've acknowledged, adolescence is full of change and full of potential. With encouragement and consistency, teens can rise to challenges and grow in ways that surprise even them. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to show up with patience, curiosity, and belief.
Thank you, Jenai, and thank you to the participants that shared what's the one thing that they are striving for. It's great to see that you're all committed to taking this presentation and putting it into practice in your lives. And I think at Forman, we really work to, and our dedicated colleagues work to put this theory and this research into practice in their everyday life. And it creates an individualized approach that is not just something that your child experiences in the classroom, but it also happens on the playing field, in the art classroom, when they're doing theater, in a variety of different spaces that they might experience, which helps them really deepen their understanding of selves and helps them shift their self-concept in understanding who they are as a learner, who they are as a person, and how they can be successful in life beyond Forman, which is our goal. We really want to think about how we can partner with families, because this work really happens in the best space when families are aligned with Forman in thinking about how we can continue to support your child in their individual growth. I think that we really want to do that by sometimes shifting the relationship between parents and their child to help them see that we're taking on kind of the homework conversations and working together to make sure that we're thinking about how we are really providing holistic support that helps them shift their self-concept, helps them build their identities, helps them be able to be a successful student in college, helps them to be able to do the program beyond college that they want to do, and really think about how that requires personalized attention to support the student, whether that be an advisory, which is a very specific program that we start every day with, that supports students in having a really close, trusted adult that they can kind of engage in this dialogue of kind of feedback on a consistent basis. That also happens with our house parents, and that's for both boarders and day students. And I think that we really want to be at the edge of where research meets practice, and so that is transforming students' lives on a day-to-day basis, and is something that we're continuously working on, and not something we see as kind of being ever completed, because teenagers are ever changing and the research around how to best support teenagers is ever changing, and we want to be at the forefront of that change.
All right, so what's next? We are exactly at 7:45 now. We know that is, we promised you a 45-minute webinar, but we are happy to stay on because we do want to answer the questions. But we also want to provide you with some next steps. So if you're interested to learn more about what we do here, you're very invited to contact any of our admission staff. You can take a screenshot of that or call any of them to reach out, and I'll give you a QR code on the next page if you would like to just fill out an inquiry form to get more information. And we also have an open house on Monday, October 13th that you're very invited to. And lastly, we would love to just stay in touch with anyone interested. Obviously, Jenai and I get very fired up about this. Allie's very passionate about the work that we do. We love talking about this because we find it very important, and we would love to connect with you and get your thoughts. So now we invite you again. If you haven't already put a question in the chat, please do. And we'll just see, we'll take a few minutes, maybe take 1 or 2 questions. Of course, we recognize if you need to leave at 7:45. Thank you for joining us. But if you want to stick around for some questions, we'll be here.
Thank you so much, Chris. We definitely have a lot of questions. I think it would be great to kind of start with, I don't think that my child or teenager sleeps enough. Can this be related to EF?
Oh my goodness, yes, yes. And incredibly, incredibly common, like incredibly common. Unfortunately, the statistics are that very, very few adolescents are getting the recommended number of hours of sleep for a multitude of reasons. And can this be connected to executive functions? Absolutely, in both directions. So it is absolutely true. It absolutely can be true that for students that struggle with executive functions, they might have difficulties getting enough sleep for many reasons. If I have time management challenges, if it's difficult for me to know when to start something or how long it's going to take, or if I procrastinate and I end up with a lot of assignments, that I'm only starting at the last minute and they take me longer than I would expect, then obviously that can impact the amount of time I have available for sleep. And then the opposite is true as well, that if I'm not sleeping enough, that can impact my executive function. So we know as adults, none of us do our best thinking when we haven't slept adequately. And so when we think about the connection between sleep and executive function skills and just sleep and student thriving in general, as much as we are able to really set up routines and structures to ensure that our adolescents are getting as close to the recommended amount of sleep as possible, that will look different for different families in terms of whether it means, removing screens at a certain time. Another common struggle are school start times that may start earlier than an adolescent's circadian rhythm. At Forman, we're fortunate that our classes don't usually start until 8:30 or 9, which is a little bit later than other school schedules. So that can also present a challenge, but absolutely there is a reciprocal connection between sleep and executive function skills. And the more that we can encourage our adolescents to get adequate sleep, the better off they're going to be.
Thank you so much, Chris. Jenai, I think this is a question for you of kind of if I'm trying the strategies that you shared and asking questions, what happens if they shut down when I ask the question and kind of start to find the questions challenging?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and something that, even us who practice this all the time have to really read and look for and be sensitive to. And so acknowledging that sometimes when the questions are happening in a moment that your child just isn't able to receive it, saying, okay, you know what? I am going to pause. It's clearly not the time that we are going to move forward with this. We're going to come back to it. And again, I invite you then, when you do choose to come back to it in a calm, not reactive moment, start open up with the why it is that you're trying to help in this way and what your intention is, rather than just more nagging or more, this is what you're doing wrong. No, look, buddy, I really believe in you and I'm trying to shift the way that we talk about this stuff. Do you think that you could help me do that? What could that look like for you, right? Inviting them to give their perspective and co-create this new dynamic with you can be even more powerful. And you'll start to get that buy-in. And the resistance, okay, so it might happen at first. It might feel awkward, it might feel forced. They might not be into it. Give it time and revisit in the right moment in a calm, unconditional, non-judgmental way.
Thank you so much. Would either of you want to talk about how Forman accommodates students who might be more introverted?
So actually, Allie, I was thinking that might be a great one for you.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to share an answer to that. I think that when we don't expect all of our students to be extroverted. I think when you think about sending your child to boarding school, that can be a scary concept in that they're living away from home. They have to share a space with someone else. We really work with our amazing student life colleagues to think about how do we support students and understand living with another person. What does that look like in terms of setting boundaries? How can you use our roommate agreement form to really think about what are the things that are important to you? What does quiet time look like to you? How important is quiet time for you? What do you need to recharge? So we really want students to be able to understand that aspect of themselves and be able to get what they need and advocate for what they need, but also so that others are aware that what they need might not be the same as someone else. We also have a pretty comprehensive orientation program that really pushes all of our students, whether they're extroverted or introverted, to really engage in our community and get to know one another. And then we really work to make sure that all of our students have a trusted adult and that they are building peer connections. And we really work as a colleague and with our student leaders to make sure we keep an eye on that.
Nice job.
I think there might be one more question that we probably could do its own presentation on, but Chris, I might just ask this to see if you have any teasers for what might be to come, which is, how is neurodiversity evolving in the age of AI?
Yeah, minimum of an hour to delve into that. It's I mean, there's so much to find out. There's so much. One of the truths about like the brain is that there is so much that we don't know, and we are discovering so much so quickly. And I mean, the pace of AI is just, I think, unlike anything that our brains have experienced before. So that's an excellent question. I think the research on that is going to continue to evolve at a really rapid pace. And it's an excellent thing to stay tuned into. You know, what do these developments in AI mean for different learning profiles? Um, how might that be harnessed to best support specific types of learners? What are the dangers we need to be aware of for specific types of learners? That's a very, very rich question. And yeah, maybe we can look at doing a deep dive at some point into that. But also, I expect that research to be evolving very rapidly in the coming months, let alone years.
That's great. I think we would have a lot of people that are interested in that. I think that that is unfortunately all we have time for in terms of questions. I would just want to add that some people ask some specific questions about things related to enrollment process and your child. Please remember that this recording is going out in an email tomorrow to all attendees with information to contact us. You should already have my email as how you got the link to the webinar. So please know that we are happy to answer any and all questions on an individual basis. If we did not get a chance to say anything else, we're so thankful for you for being here. We're excited in sharing our community with you. And I just want to make sure that we thank Chris and Jenai for their work on this presentation and for sharing all of their knowledge with us. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.